guys, welcome back to my channel. So in this video, I want to give you guys a houseplant update on 3 of my most asked about plants on Instagram, and they happen to be 3 of my favorite houseplants right now. They are the Pilea Peperomioides, the Ficus Elastica, and the string of hearts that you see here. So I've had these guys for some time now, and they're thriving really well in my home. So I want to share with you guys some of my general care tips, my secrets, and also answer some of the common questions I often get about these guys. So we'll start with the Pilea Peperomioides. So this guy I got back in November of 2017, and you can see here how small he was back then. I repotted him about 3 times now, propagated its babies a few times, and gave it to some friends and family. And you guys can see right here how much he's grown in just a little over 2 years. And obviously the question I often get is how do you get him to grow so big? And I would say the number one thing personally for me that's worked is the lighting he gets. So he sits right there in the corner of my living room, gets south facing light and a few hours of direct morning sun, which has really helped get this guy to grow really fast. I do think they're fast grower if you do give them really good lighting. And the other question I get is how do you get this guy to grow perfectly straight? So he's not as straight as he was when he was younger, obviously, but one thing I do is I do rotate this guy every 2 or 3 days, and that's because obviously plants like to follow where the sun is, and I only have my window on one side of my home, so I often have to rotate it just to make sure he can grow as straight up as possible. Another secret of mine on how I get this guy to grow big and lush is the water I use and how I water this guy. So I use filter water and not tap water, and the reason for it is because there's harsh chemicals in tap water, and what it will typically do is it will damage your leaves. It will put some pores and make holes on them, rather than using filtered water, which typically is a little bit cleaner and better for your Pilea. So you can use tap water, but I always suggest you leave the tap water sitting for like 24 hours to get rid of the chemicals that's in there, and then you can use that to water your plant. But more importantly, when you water this guy, so first of all, you only water your Pilea when the soil is completely dry. And what I mean by that is not like the top 2 inches being dry, but literally like, you know, sinking your finger as deep as possible and making sure that the soil is not wet by any means. And you can tell by just lifting your plant up to make sure that it's light. But once you determine it needs to be watered, what you have to make sure you do is when you water this guy is allow the water to drain through. So you want to make sure you're watering this guy thoroughly and then seeing that water drain through your container or your pot that you have him in. So that's why it's very important to have plants that are in drainage pots, whether it's a ceramic pot that has holes or these plastic containers. And what that does is it will obviously wash the roots and the soil and allow it to drain through. If it's not draining through, what's going to happen is that water is going to sit there in the soil, and the next time you water it again, it will collect, and what will happen is obviously leaves will drop, root rot, and your plant will die. So as you guys can see here, the way I'm watering this guy right now is obviously you have to make sure that the water drains through. Another common question about them is the leaves are dropping on my Pilea. How do you prevent that from happening? So it's normal for your Pilea to drop leaves, especially at the bottom of the plant or the older and more mature leaves. You guys can't really tell, but this guy has dropped a few leaves at the bottom of the main plant, and the reason why he looks so full is because of all these babies surrounding the base. But if you look closely here, you can see that there are no leaves at the bottom of the main stem, and there are a lot of leaves and growing at the top. Again, normal for your Pilea to drop leaves, especially when the season changes, as long as the top is showing new growth. But and obviously the babies are showing a lot of new growth. So that's how I get this guy to look full, is I kept a lot of the babies on the base, and you can even see some of these guys probably need to be removed and you know, given in their own pot. One of these guys is actually already producing his own baby, so which means this guy is going to be a grandpa. But yeah, so those are some of the questions I often get, and those are kind of the secrets in how I care for this guy. I did do a complete care and propagation video on the Pilea last year. I'll provide a link right here as well as in the description below, so definitely check that out if you guys are looking for more of a detailed care guide for the Pilea. But yeah, so next plant we're going to move on to is the Ficus Elastica Tineke. So this guy I got back in the summer of 2018. I actually found this one at Home Depot as part of an arrangement of plants in a pot. And yeah, when I first got him, he was probably only about a third of the size that you see right now. Obviously doing really, really well. The common questions I often get about this guy, or the common problems that people tend to have, is the browning and the leaves dropping. Whether it's the browning in the middle of the leaves or on the edges of it. I've never experienced any of that, and I think the secret to it is, I would say, are a couple things. One is obviously the lighting this guy gets. Similar to the Pilea Peperomioides, I have this guy in the corner upstairs in my bedroom, gets a lot of bright south-facing light, and again, a couple hours of morning direct sunlight. And the other thing I would say is the watering and how I water this guy. So unlike the Pilea, it doesn't need to be filtered water. I use regular tap water, but I actually make sure this guy is bone dry, meaning the soil, not the top 2 inches or not even the top 3 inches, but the entire soil is dry before I water this guy. And the way for me to tell that is literally I stick a finger in there as deep as I can to make sure that the soil is not wet, as well as I'll lift the guy up to see how light he feels, and that's how I usually know when it needs to be watered. But yeah, once it needs to be watered, the key again is you have to water this guy thoroughly because of a couple of reasons. One, you've just allowed it to go completely dry, and the second thing is by watering it thoroughly, you're gonna make sure that that water drains through your pot or drains through the container, and that is very, very important because if it doesn't drain through, that water is sitting in the soil, and the next time you water it, it'll collect some more water, and eventually what it's gonna do, it's gonna create all these brown spots on your leaves, and it's gonna create root rot, and then your plant will die, and yeah, you won't have no more Ficus Elastica Tineke. So that to me is my secret when it comes to you know, caring for this guy, is a lot of bright light and the way you water. You got to make sure that the water drains through. I can't stress that enough. And but yeah, so that is that is it for this guy. Again, I also did a how to care for your Ficus Elastica last year, so definitely check that out if you want more of a detailed care guide. But I haven't done a propagation video yet, so I am going to do that maybe next week or the week after, because I do have a few of my burgundy that I've cut and is rooting in water right now, and I'm gonna plant them in soil. But yeah, so the next houseplant update needs no introduction. It is the the string of hearts. So this guy I've had for almost 2 years now. Got it in the summer of 2018 from Winnipeg, and when I first got this guy, it obviously did not look anything like this. He was maybe only a foot long, and the leaves and the vines weren't as thick and lush that you see right now. He's still in his original container and still in the same location ever since, so gets a lot of bright indirect light. He's about 10 feet away from my south-facing window, and ever since then has obviously grown to be really long, really lush. I've got this guy actually touching the ground a few times, and I've cut and propagated a few times as well. I did do a detailed care and how to propagate your string of hearts video, so definitely check that out as well. I always get asked the question, how do you get this guy to grow straight and not looking like a tangled mess? And the reason being is when I first got this guy, I spent nearly 2 hours unwrapping him from the top and untangling each vine that you guys see here. I actually posted this video on my IGTV, so definitely check it out. But it was a lot easier to do then because he was shorter and it wasn't as long. Imagine doing that when it's this long. It's going to be nearly impossible. So I knew that was a perfect opportunity to untangle him and make sure that it grows nice and straight and gives that curtain vibe look that he's got going on right now. But not to say that this guy never gets tangled, because it often does, and whenever it does, I still spend time untangling him because you do want to control it. But I remember when I used to water this guy, I would take it over to the sink and I would water it then, and then I would hang it back up, and I would spend maybe 20 minutes untangling all the vines that got tangled. So I actually stopped watering this guy over to the sink. I actually water this guy now from his location by getting on a chair that you guys see here, getting a pot to place underneath the plant, and then watering this guy from the top. Another secret of mine that I would say when it comes to making sure that your string of hearts is nice and healthy is the way you water this guy. You're seeing a pattern here, right? Like all 3 of these plants, I water to make sure that the water drains through. So whenever I water this guy, I get on my chair, I get my watering can, and I water this guy until I see that water drain through. Now, before you water this guy though, one thing to keep in mind, you never want to water this guy when the soil is wet. You want to make sure it is completely dry as well. And because I can't just easily go up there and stick my finger in without getting a chair, the way I know when to water this guy is I know his watering schedule. So during the summer, it would be about maybe every 2 weeks. During the winter, it's maybe about every 3 weeks. But before I do that, I actually go and touch one of the leaves, especially the ones that are a little bit thicker here. I usually like to feel the leaves to see if they're a bit plump or they're soft. If they're firm and plump, that means they don't need to be watered. But if they're starting to get soft and it's been about 2 weeks now since I last watered this guy, that means he needs to be watered. So that that is definitely the way I water this guy. But more importantly, again, you want to make sure that water drains through. If you don't see that water drain through, odds are it is sitting in your soil, and most likely your plant is going to get root rot and it will die, right? So you want to make sure that that water drains through, and that goes for any houseplant you have. So another way to make your string of hearts look really nice and full is by cutting this guy and propagating it. So again, I did do a how to care and propagation video of the string of hearts in more detail, so definitely check that out. But there are two things that typically will happen once you cut this guy and propagate it. One is when you cut this guy, the remaining vine that was a single vine will typically split into 2 vines. So now instead of 1, you'll have 2 vines, and sometimes that will even split to 3 vines that you guys see here. So this is the reason why here at the bottom is a little bit more thicker and lush and full than at the top, because I often would cut here at the bottom, and whenever I would cut, the vines that were cut will now be into 2 vines or 3 vines. So that is one way to make your string of hearts full. I'm actually thinking about cutting this guy at the top here, so that way it can start growing really thick and full here as well. I think I'm going to do that when I repot this guy, but it'll also be easier to make sure that he's not a tangled mess when I do repot this guy. The second thing that happens is the cuttings that you cut and root it in water, you can then place it back at the top to make it grow and make that top look full. So especially if you only have like 6 or 7 vines or 8 vines, what you want to do then is cut, propagate, get those guys rooted in water, and then plant it back at the top, and then you'll have like 16 vines instead of the 8 vines that you normally had. So that is definitely a way to make your string of hearts look nice and full. But before you can do all of that, really then my number 1 tip is making sure that it is healthy by giving it a lot of bright indirect light, and making sure that you water this guy when it's completely dry and allowing that water to drain through. I cannot stress how important that is, because honestly, I don't do anything different to most of my plants, and I often get the question is how do they look so nice and beautiful? And honestly, basic plant care, good lighting and good watering. So that's pretty much it. Those are all my secrets and tips on how I care for each of these guys. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it and found it helpful, and if you have any further questions about them, definitely comment below and I'll try and get to them as soon as I can. Enjoy the rest of your week. We'll see you guys soon. Peace.